In the past few decades, Japan has experienced one economic shock after the other. From the burst of the asset bubble in the early 90s to the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, the country can't seem to catch a break, plunging into a full-blown recession every few years. This has given the country's economy every reason to fail, and fail quite spectacularly. Yet this hasn't happened. How has Japan managed to stay afloat? To answer this question, we have to first look into what has brought Japan's economy to the brink of ruin. After all, this is the same economy that was the envy of the world in the 1980s, boasting the largest gross national product, or GNP, per capita. This was made possible by one of the most impressive periods of economic growth in recorded history, the so-called Japanese economic miracle, which started shortly after World War II. During this period, Japan's economy grew by leaps and bounds, leading many countries to fear the Japanese economic juggernaut, and many economists to start making predictions of when it would surpass the US as the world's largest economy. Obviously, this never happened. In fact, Japan has been left well behind the US, as well as several other countries that once lagged behind it, such as China. The reasons Japan is losing the battle for economic dominance against the US are the same reasons that's ushered in the prolonged period of Japan's economic woes. So let's dive deep into Japan's rocky financial road. There's no discussion of Japan's economy and its poor performance without mentioning the lost decade, or rather, the lost decades, as this period of stagnation and deflation has continued to the present day. The lost decade initially referred to the 1990s. So what happened to Japan during this decade to earn it such a grim moniker? One of the longest-running economic crises in history. The roots of Japan's economic downturn can be traced back to the bursting of the economic bubble in the early 1990s. This monumental event was the result of speculative frenzy of the 1980s, characterized by inflated asset prices and real estate values. But what caused the frenzy in question? The answer is simple: loose monetary policies. In 1985, Japan joined other major world economies in the Plaza Accord to address the issue of the strong US dollar. The goal of this agreement was to correct trade imbalances between the US and Germany and the US and Japan by depreciating the US dollar relative to the Japanese yen and the German Deutschmark. To be fair, the Plaza Accord did manage to correct the trade balance between the US and Germany. But for Japan, the consequences were starkly different. The yen surged in value, making Japanese exports significantly more expensive for foreign buyers, US included. Given how export-oriented Japan is, it shouldn't be surprising that the country's government moved quickly to counteract the adverse effects on its exports. These moves included lowering interest rates to as low as 2.5% and injecting liquidity into the financial system. As a result, the Tokyo Stock Exchange's benchmark index, the Nikkei, reached unprecedented levels, and real estate values soared to unsustainable heights. The flood of easy money might have created the illusion of prosperity, but this prosperity was built on an extremely fragile foundation. That much was clear to the Japanese financial ministry by the early 1990s. Seeing the bubble was about to burst, this entity raised interest rates. The goal was to cool down the frenzied economic activity, especially in real estate and stock markets, by making borrowing more expensive and less attractive to the Japanese. Unfortunately, that decision proved to be a double-edged sword. Though it did tighten monetary policies and curb speculative excess, the hike in interest rates also had a detrimental effect on businesses and individuals who were heavily leveraged. The sudden shift in monetary policies triggered a chain reaction, including a severe credit crunch and a sharp decline in consumer spending. The stock market collapsed and companies found themselves buried in debt, leading to widespread bankruptcies. The government's response, or rather lack thereof, only exacerbated the situation. Initially slow to address the crisis, Japanese policymakers struggled to quickly implement any effective measures. The deeper they sank in economic uncertainty, the less the public trusted the government's ability to address the crisis, which only intensified the country's economic malaise. During this period, Japan's GDP averaged 1.3%, which was drastically lower compared to other G7 countries. To put this figure into perspective, the US's GDP reached 4.87% during the same period. But things would only get worse from there, hence the lost decades moniker. Japan's economy continued to grapple with deflation, low growth, and a fragile banking system, challenges that only worsened due to the country's lack of cohesive reforms. Japan's GDP growth only averaged 0.5% per year right up until the moment the world was hit by a global financial crisis. Unsurprisingly, the Great Recession did little to help Japan's economy. That's why the 2010s brought little respite. Sure, Japan's GDP growth rate grew a little, to just under 1% a year, but the end of this decade ushered in another global disaster, the COVID-19 pandemic. With a new global recession and a complete shutdown of economic activities, Japan once again faced the daunting task of economic recovery in the face of a rapidly evolving global crisis. To be fair, this crisis eventually managed to bring something good to Japan's economy, disrupting its status quo, but more on that later. Experts continue to examine Japan's lost decades, debating the unprecedented length of this economic stagnation for years. Though most of these experts agree on what caused the crisis, as explained in this video, few can unanimously pinpoint a reason why this crisis persists. Numerous reasons have been proposed to explain the prolonged nature of Japanese stagnation beyond the initial lost decade, both economic and non-economic. So let's examine the most popular theories. Let's start with one prominent non-economic reason: the decline of Japan's technological dominance. During the 1970s boom, Japan was decades ahead of the times and a leader in technological innovation. They adopted computers significantly faster than Western nations and used technology to produce cutting-edge gadgets, building world-class infrastructure, and boosting their productivity to never-before-seen levels. Basically, an era might have been in the 70s, but Japan was already living in the 2000s. The trouble is, they're still living in the 2000s, and the rest of the world, as you're well aware, aren't. In other words, a nation that was once decades ahead of everyone else is now decades behind them. This can easily be seen in Japan's most crucial industries. Take high-tech as an example. Japan used to be synonymous with technological achievements, setting standards for the rest of the world. Now Microsoft and Apple alone are worth more than all the Japanese companies combined. Yes, you heard that correctly, not just high-tech companies, but all its companies in general. Besides Sony, no Japanese tech company has the same global influence it had before. Japan used to be responsible for a considerable portion of the world's mobile phone production. Plus, the country's mobile phones led the way across various industry innovations, from email capabilities in 1999 to electronic payments in 2004. So it isn't surprising that having a phone from Japan was once considered a big deal. That's no longer the case, with companies from the US, China, and South Korea now dominating the Japanese mobile phone market, projected to be worth a staggering $500 billion. That's $500 billion in 2024. This is a direct result of Japanese companies being incredibly conservative with any kind of new processes, preferring to stick to what they've been doing during their peak in the 1980s. But is missing out on lucrative markets the only way Japan's technological decline has hurt the country's economy? Far from it. The loss of technological dominance has had far-reaching consequences on Japan's economy. Arguably, the worst of them is the loss of productivity among workers. As Paul Krugman, one of the, if not the most influential economists alive today, put it, productivity isn't everything, but in the long run, it's almost everything. In other words, Japan's technological decline probably didn't alarm any of the mostly elderly leaders of the country's top companies, but it cost them and Japan a lot in the long run. After all, the use of technology is a key driver of efficiency in virtually any industry. If this productivity loss or stall persists, Japan will increasingly struggle to remain competitive on the world stage. In the worst-case scenario, Japan might witness a massive exodus of its brightest minds, looking for better opportunities abroad. For any country, this so-called brain drain is concerning. For Japan, it has the potential to be catastrophic. Why? It's simple. Japan has a massive demographic problem. This, coincidentally, is another chronic economic issue that has contributed to the continuation of the lost decades. This demographic problem primarily has to do with the age of the Japanese population. In 2023, national data showed that 1 in 10 people in Japan are aged 80 or older. In addition, a staggering 29.1% of the country's 125 million population is aged 65 or older, a record high for Japan. Combine this data with one of the lowest birth rates in the world at around 1.37, and you get a demographic time bomb ticking away. This poses two major problems for Japan. One is a highly unfavorable dependency ratio, and two, the country's labor force is shrinking by the day, taking Japan's productivity potential with it. The dependency ratio determines the strain on the working-age population to support dependents, particularly the elderly. In Japan, this ratio surpassed 68% in 2023. Since there are not enough younger people in the workforce and too many people have long lifespans, the Social Security funds run deficits. These deficits must then be covered by the Japanese government from its fiscal budget. In 2023, the Japanese government allocated an astonishing 22 trillion yen to make up for shortfalls in the Social Security fund. This shortfall is to be covered by issuing debt, which is a problem in and of itself. Why? Well, Japan already has the highest ratio of national debt in the developed world at 263%. To put this figure in perspective, the US's national debt ratio is around 97%. This figure is also one of the primary reasons the world has expected Japan's economy to fail. After all, it happened to countries with a significantly lower ratio. Take Greece as an example. In 2015, the country defaulted on its debt with a national debt ratio of slightly over 189%. Now, 190% is no small ratio, but it's still lower than Japan's staggering 263%. We'll discuss potential explanations for why Japan didn't share the same fate as Greece later. But for now, let's examine Japan's diminishing population, which has wreaked havoc on the country's labor force. The productivity of any country is measured using the labor force participation rate. You calculate this rate by taking the total number of people over the age of 16 working or looking for work, and dividing this figure by the total number of people of working age minus institutionalized individuals. In Japan, this rate barely surpasses 63%, which means almost 40% of people of working age don't work. Now, this can happen due to a variety of reasons. Those people might not need to work. They might be disabled. They might be supported by a partner or family member. Whatever the case may be, this percentage has profound implications for Japan's economic productivity. Low productivity means low GDP, which is why increasing the labor force participation rate in Japan is of the utmost importance. Now, Japan can make up for a lower labor force participation rate in two primary ways. One is to get existing workers to work longer, and two, import additional labor through immigration. Unfortunately for Japan, none of those options seems particularly feasible. When it comes to getting the existing workforce to work for longer, is this even physically possible? Japan is notorious for overworking its people, so much so there's a term in Japanese for the death by overwork, karoshi. The country also has an unusually high number of work-related suicides, which reached almost 3,000 in 2022. The country has a history of encouraging and awarding people for putting in more hours, even if they aren't particularly productive. In other words, you can't ask people to work more if they're already working more than most other workers in the world. But what about bringing in workers from abroad? The situation is equally grim in this department, if not more. Sure, this seems like an excellent idea in theory. Japan gets highly productive, tax-paying workers without investing resources into raising and educating them. But getting these workers seems to be tricky for Japan. You see, Japanese isn't commonly learned as a second language. This makes it more challenging for most people to choose Japan for employment over English-speaking countries. Even if they seek to learn the language later on, they'll have a difficult time succeeding, as Japanese is often ranked among the top 10 hardest languages to learn in the world. But let's be honest, language isn't the only obstacle preventing foreign workers from coming to Japan. As we mentioned, the country isn't particularly appealing work-wise due to its reputation for pushing workers too hard. Plus, the average salaries in Japan are substantially lower than other popular destinations for expatriate workers, such as the US, Australia, and Western Europe. According to most estimates, the average salary in Japan is approximately $41,000 per year, while the workers in the US on average earn almost $60,000 for the same period. And it's not like Japan's exactly rushing to welcome foreign workers with open arms. Even though encouraging immigration at the same rate as the US would undoubtedly increase the country's economic output, Japan has a reputation for being somewhat standoffish to outsiders. It makes it extremely difficult for them to integrate into Japanese society and culture. However, some positive changes might be on the way. In 2023, this notoriously insular country recorded 2.99 million foreign nationals living in Japan, a 10.7% increase from the previous year. This is also the biggest year-to-year increase since Japan's Ministry of Internal Affairs and Communications started keeping count. This probably has to do with the fact that the population of Japan has significantly decreased for the 14th year in a row. Data released in January 2023 showed that Japan's shrinking population decreased by a massive 800,000 to 122.42 million. It seems the country's hostility to immigration has been somewhat tamped down, faced with its persistent and beyond alarming demographic challenges. But while there might be some hope in the migration department, another economic hurdle looms as a stumbling block for Japan's economy: governmental overregulation. This criticism has been repeatedly voiced by experts who argue that the cumbersome regulatory environment hampers innovation, stifles entrepreneurial initiatives, and obstructs the efficient use of labor, both domestic and foreign. Even though the same criticism could be heard before the last decade, little has seemingly changed since. How stifling is Japan's level of regulation? Consider that if you want to sell milk, bread, meat, fish, or frozen food in your store, you'll need a whopping 21 approvals. Are you interested in opening a larger multi-purpose store? No problem, you just need about 75 applications for 26 different permits. Even displaying specific food in different sections of the same store calls for 2 different permits. Overregulation is also a major contributor to the fact that Japanese consumers pay 1/3 more for goods and services than US citizens, as it drives productivity down and prices up. This is one of the reasons why Japan's economy is plagued by low demand. Interestingly, many experts have also singled out low demand as one of the reasons for the lost decades. When the bubble exploded, consumers held on to their savings for dear life, fearing the country's economy would get even worse. This cautious consumer behavior over economic uncertainty has seemingly perpetuated over time and has actually contributed to that uncertainty. Talk about a never-ending cycle. Now, in most cases, resolving inadequate demand is a breeze. The country's central bank, the Bank of Japan in this case, injects more money or has the government spend more. But nothing is simple when it comes to Japan's economy. The government can't spend more, as it already has quite a severe fiscal problem, as discussed earlier. As for the Bank of Japan, injecting more money didn't help, since the Japanese people continue to choose saving instead of spending or investing. This means that Japanese companies, too, must be persuaded to invest and expand, thus stimulating the country's economy. This, however, goes against the severely restricted flow of credit offered by Japan's banking system. In other words, to stimulate the businesses, the Bank of Japan would have to use its full credit capacity. So there you have it. One reason after another why Japan's economy should crumble, and yet it persists in what can only be deemed as the Japanese economic miracle 2.0. But is it truly magic and miracles that have sustained Japan's resilience? Not quite. The fact that the country refuses to succumb to economic challenges is a testament to some pragmatic policies, a newly embraced adaptability, and persistent efforts to overcome challenges. Plus, the country is right on schedule. As a prominent Japanese economist, Masahiko Aoki predicted it would take about 30 years for Japan to recover from the original lost decade. Still, after listening about all of Japan's economic woes, it's perfectly understandable to be surprised by the fact that Japan's economy is still standing. Even still standing might be an understatement, as Japan is actually the world's 3rd largest economy, only behind the US and China. So let's break down why an economic breakdown didn't happen. The answer boils down to 2 things: external shocks and an internal evolution. Let's work our way from the outside in. If you remember, we've mentioned that COVID-19 pandemic actually helped Japan's economy recover in a way. The primary reason Japan recovered from World War II as quickly as it did was the fact that this war was a massive shakeup. Essentially, Japan was starting from scratch, so there was no time for its limiting norms to hold progress back. Luckily for Japan, and unluckily for the rest of the world, the 2020s are all about major shakeups. The COVID-19 pandemic, the war in Ukraine, the tensions between US and China, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, take your pick. All this geopolitical turbulence has significantly and positively impacted Japan's economic landscape. For starters, executives have quickly realized they can't keep the status quo up, and something has to change. That's why a growing number of companies have started putting their money to use, significantly boosting the country's capital investments. The government has too, remembering its glory days of innovation, is now pledging to spend approximately $13.2 billion to fund the green transition, thus taking the lead on a global scale. Japan's also profited from the location risk associated with many global regions, becoming an attractive destination for businesses seeking stability amid geopolitical uncertainties. Even if these businesses don't build factories in Japan, they often partner with local companies to obtain the necessary equipment, vehicles, and machine tools, which is a win for Japan either way. Most of these new businesses used to operate in or collaborate with China, but that was before the anti-China consensus that seems to be gaining momentum in the US and beyond. Now Japan's the go-to destination in Asia, promising all the advantages without any of the risks. Even the US, which once perceived Japan as a rival, has seized this opportunity, as IBM entered a partnership with its Japanese counterparts, seeking to ensure a steady and secure supply of chips. This move alone has a huge potential to bring manufacturing back to Japan on a larger scale. So it's no wonder that Japan's Ministry of Economy, Trade, and Industry has already allocated a staggering $13 billion in subsidies to revitalize its semiconductor industry. As for the internal evolution, it has primarily been led by gradual institutional and generational shifts. As more younger people take over, Japan has slowly began to move away from the seniority system that rewards workers based on their years of service rather than merit. Naturally, such a system wasn't conducive to innovation, as people weren't encouraged to take risks. As Takeo Hoshi, a professor of economics at the University of Tokyo, put it, talent was trapped within firms for life, but not anymore. Slowly but surely, business owners are creating a new Japan where innovation thrives. This is evident by the fact that investments in Japanese startups have increased almost 10 times from 2013 to 2022, from 88 to 877 billion yen. During that same period, the number of venture capital funds has quadrupled. For Japan, it's no doubt refreshing to see such large numbers that aren't debt-related. Speaking of debt, you must wonder how the Japanese economy has been able to sustain such a high debt relative to its GDP without defaulting like Greece. As promised, here's an explanation. Firstly, most of Japan's debt is held domestically, which means it can't be subjected to sudden changes in international markets or a capital overflow. Japan is also monetarily sovereign, as it has its own currency. In other words, the country can't ever default, as it can simply just print more yen. Also, the country's high domestic savings rate can help fund its debt. And of course, the Bank of Japan has implemented several monetary policies aimed at supporting the economy that have managed to mitigate some of the risks associated with debt. But this time, the Bank of Japan is moving slowly. The bank has made gradual changes to interest rates, thus avoiding precipitating potential disruptions in financial markets. More importantly, the bank stuck to this approach even when inflation surpassed 2%, which is a huge win for Japan, a country that's only known stagnation or deflation for decades. If all goes as planned, the strategy should result in Japanese investors pulling their savings out of foreign countries or redirecting them domestically. But don't get it twisted. Just because things are looking up, it doesn't mean Japan is out of the woods yet. With the number of economic challenges that have plagued the country for decades, it'll take a lot of time to fully overcome these deeply rooted issues. That's why it shouldn't be surprising that Goldman Sachs projects Japan will no longer be among the top 5 biggest economies in the world by 2050 and the top 10 by 2075. But as Simon Kuznets, a prominent U.S. economist, once said, there are 4 types of countries in the world: developed, undeveloped, Japan, and Argentina. This quote alone makes it clear that Japan defies easy categorization. Also, the mere fact that its economy hasn't failed in the face of such complex economic challenges speaks volumes about its unique ability to navigate adversity. What do you think? Do you believe Japan will remain an economic superpower for the foreseeable future, despite the fatalistic predictions made by Goldman Sachs? Or do you think the country's refusal to surrender will play a pivotal role in defying such predictions? Share your thoughts, opinions, and theories in the comments section below.